Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. More than a year into President Trump's second term, the world is already feeling the impact of a dramatically different American posture, marked by a harder line on China, a more transactional approach to alliances, and renewed questions about the future of nuclear diplomacy. From intensifying military activity in the Indo-Pacific to deepening ties between Pyongyang, Moscow, and Beijing, to the ongoing war in Ukraine, the international order is under real pressure. So in this shifting environment, how are U.S. allies like South Korea positioning themselves? And how might Washington's next moves reshape the balance we've known for decades? To help us unpack those questions, we are joined today by someone who's shaped U.S. foreign policy for decades. John Bolton, former ambassador to the United Nations and former national security advisor to President Donald Trump. A very big welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Glad to be with you.
Thank you for joining us. So, Ambassador, we want to start a discussion by hearing your personal philosophy. You've served across multiple administrations, from President Reagan to President Trump, helping shape U.S. foreign and national security policy. What is the guiding principle that's anchored your approach to diplomacy and national security over the years?
Well, I think the guiding principle is ensuring that America's people, and its friends around the world are safe from the many, many threats that we've faced over the years. It's changed as time has gone on. The days of the Cold War are over, but there are many other threats that unfortunately have come to replace that as real concerns that we have to think about going forward. So I've always been a strong supporter of what Ronald Reagan called peace through strength. And a system of alliances that makes the U.S. and its allies collectively stronger. And I do think that approach is under threat in the Trump administration, but there's a real debate that's about to break out in the United States, I think, and I'm convinced that over time, the more normal, I would call it, Reaganite approach will prevail.
So power through strength and the hope to ensure the safety of American people, that would be a very important principle that clearly explains the continuity you've maintained across different administrations. Then if there's one moment that could have put that philosophy to test, it could be the 2019 Hanoi summit. I believe you were right there when the summit collapsed. What did that experience tell you about how North Korea actually negotiates?
Well, I think Kim Jong-un came into that meeting very confident he could get a deal similar to deals that North Korea has negotiated going back to the agreed framework in the 1990s. And the deal always works to North Korea's advantage. They get tangible economic concessions of one kind or another at the front end, and they make vague and essentially amorphous promises to denuclearize. But their performance doesn't come until much later. And what we've seen over and over again is that these commitments by North Korea to denuclearize are not serious. What they are intended to do is induce South Korea, the U.S., Japan, others to provide these economic benefits to help prop up North Korea's failing economic system. So we went into the negotiations first in Singapore and then in Hanoi, clearly understanding that going down that route would fail as it failed repeatedly in the past. And I think the North Koreans, Kim Jong-un in particular, were very surprised that they didn't come away with it from a deal. Not because of something we did, but because they thought they could put one over on us, as they had done so many times before with prior U.S. administration.
So after that, the Hanoi summit collapsed, and now fast forward to 7 years, President Trump is back again in the office, and we're once again talking about North Korea. So, Ambassador, do you think North Korea could be a real priority for President Trump this time around?
Well, it should be a priority because in the years since Trump finished his first term, North Korea has simply continued its developmental efforts on ballistic missiles of various sizes and ranges, and undoubtedly continued development of its nuclear weapons program, not with tests, but with refinements and building additional nuclear warheads that they're undoubtedly storing in deeply buried sites somewhere in North Korea. We can't discount the possibility that North Korea has cooperated with Iran in both its nuclear program and its ballistic missile program. We know their ties go way back. And we've also seen the amazing development that Kim Jong-un has been able to return North Korea to a position similar to what his grandfather achieved with Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin. Kim Il-sung was able to position North Korea between the two communist giants during the Cold War, very much to North Korea's advantage. When the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, its ties with North Korea dropped dramatically, and North Korea was much more reliant on China. Kim Jong-un has been able to change that script by providing weapons and ammunition for Russia to use in its war in Ukraine, and most remarkably of all, by supplying North Korean troops to fight in Ukraine. So I think during this last 5-year period, North Korea has become a more serious threat. And I have to say, it's kind of surprising to me that during the first year of Trump's second term, he barely addressed the North Korean issue at all.
So if we're going to look forward to another summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, what do you think needs to be different this time around, since a lot of things have changed?
Well, it's hard to know when that summit might occur. Kim Jong-un has shown no sign, no particular interest in seeing his old friend Donald Trump. Trump obviously has met with Vladimir Putin, dealing largely with the war in Ukraine, and unsuccessfully, I might add. Trump has a trip to China scheduled in April, so just a few months away. And so the omission of contact with Kim Jong-un kind of stands out. Remember, back when they were meeting with each other, Trump said publicly that he and Kim had fallen in love. That's not quite the way I think Kim Jong-un views it. So it's very interesting to watch how North Korea is playing this. I suspect that their lack of interest in a meeting with Trump shows they think they have a strong hand to play, that they continue to develop their ballistic missile and nuclear capabilities. What's the point of talking to Trump at this point?
All right. It does sound like any future dialogue would require a far more grounded strategic footing at this point. Of course, President Trump also shifted the U.S. approach to economic diplomacy. His use of tariffs as a strategic tool is dealing a big blow to allies and the global markets. Ambassador, where do you see that strategy heading now, especially as economic policy continues to play a role in national security?
I think the biggest factor we're still waiting for is a Supreme Court decision here in the United States to see if they uphold the validity of the so-called Liberation Day tariffs in April. Under a statute known as the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, or IEPA. Those sanctions have been challenged on the ground that IEPA doesn't give Trump the authority to impose the tariffs, and that if it did, the statute would be an unconstitutional delegation of Congress's power to tax. We don't know how the court will rule. We don't know when the decision will come. But if the court strikes the tariffs down, that will dramatically change Trump's ability to use tariffs in the way that he has. My own opinion is that this trade war that he's caused around the world is harmful to the U.S., harmful to our major trading partners, harmful to the international economic system generally. It's not the way to do business, and the erratic and unsystematic way Trump threatens tariffs, sometimes imposes tariffs and then takes them back, really leads to the kind of chaos in international trade that inhibits companies from doing it. If you're not certain what the terms of trade are going to be, you're going to hesitate to make significant commitments. And I think that harms all economies in the international scene, particularly the United States, which has trade relations, important trade relations with many countries around the world.
Right. So this intersection of economic tools and national security, it's quite concerning globally, and we'll really have to wait for the Supreme Court ruling moving forward. But let's bring our topic to South Korea a little bit. So last year's summit with President Trump and President Lee Jae-myung was described as a pace setter in the process. And if I'm not mistaken, you spoke quite positively about that meeting at that time. Do you think that kind of mediating role by South Korea could actually help rebuild trust or reopen dialogue between the U.S. and North Korea?
Well, I think making sure that U.S.-South Korea relations remain strong is the top priority, and that's why I was so pleased at the outcome of the summit, because you never know with Trump. He views international affairs through the prism of his personal relations with other heads of state. So it looks like that relationship is off to a good start, and I think there were encouraging signs about things like trilateral military cooperation with Japan, which I think strengthens all of us in East Asia. And I would look forward to South Korea playing a larger role in East Asian and really Indo-Pacific affairs. I've said before, and I still believe that South Korea should join the Quad of Japan, India, Australia, and the United States to help deal with the problems posed by China. There are many other steps that could be taken too. Whether this will have an effect on Kim Jong-un in North Korea, though, I think remains to be seen.
So that kind of role and responsibility certainly carries weight, especially if it comes with sustained credibility on both sides. But Ambassador, still, really, the regional landscape is really more complex than it was a few years ago. So deepening ties between North Korea and Russia and growing strategic competition between U.S. and China, the very framework of alliances seem to be kind of shifting. So in that context, what do you think is the single most important thing this whole Washington alliance needs to stay strong?
Well, the virtue of the alliance is that it is a significant force for stability by deterring any ambitions that North Korea, Russia, or China may have in the region. But I think it's also why, despite the fact that every effort should be made to keep bilateral ROK U.S. ties close, I would hope that South Korea would look at the larger picture in the region as well. We read every day about the concern of a Chinese attack on Taiwan or throwing a blockade around Taiwan to collapse the regime. We know about Chinese threats in the South China Sea. So I think everybody along China's periphery is very worried about the evidence, increasing evidence of China's desire to extend its hegemony and looking at Xi Jinping further consolidating his own power. The recent very dramatic purge of the Chinese military leadership is an indication of that. So that while it's obviously South Korea's highest priority to worry about what's happening across the demilitarized zone, South Korea is now a big, sophisticated country and a big economic player with a strong military capability. And I think working in the broader East Asia or Indo-Pacific context is in South Korea's interest and in the interest of the other countries worried about China's future plans.
Right, so it will be important for South Korea to expand its interest to the Indo-Pacific region as well. Now, let's also touch upon the military side of the equation. You've mentioned about South Korea's interest in denuclearization. The U.S. is reinforcing its posture along the first island chain, and Seoul is still in talks over OPCON transfer. Given all this situation, what should the role of U.S. forces Korea actually look like going forward?
Well, I think that to the extent that we can build partnerships with both our current allies and others in the region who are worried, that this strengthens deterrence for everybody. I think the example of AUKUS, the U.S., U.K., Australian nuclear submarine project, is a good case study. It will increase Australia's ability to patrol, particularly in the Indian Ocean, where Chinese efforts are increasing and of great concern. I think there are analogous kinds of projects that South Korea could engage in with other Asian partners, with the U.S., with partners from Europe as well. I think it's very significant and a big plus for South Korea that it has provided weapons and ammunition to Ukraine as it tries to fight off the unprovoked Russian aggression. So I think people need to be creative about how to do this. There's no unique formula. Nobody's arguing for an Asian NATO. I think people understand there are significant differences between East and South Asia on the one hand and Europe on the other. But increased cooperation for mutual security objectives and enhanced trade, too, I think is in everybody's benefit.
Hmm. Then, if we zoom out a little bit further, Ambassador, the Arctic is suddenly back on the radar. Greenland came up in the headlines again recently. What do you think, what do you see as the biggest strategic challenge in that region right now?
Well, I think unfortunately Trump very badly handled the whole Greenland situation. I think he alienated a lot of our best allies in Europe, and I think worried allies around the world. The fact is the Arctic should be a concern to all of us because increased Russian and Chinese efforts to use the Arctic for their own purposes are becoming increasingly evident. Russia has always been an Arctic power, but now China aspires to be an Arctic power, and that affects everybody that has to deal with them. Greenland is a big part of it, but you know, Greenland and the U.S. have long relations. We had 17 military bases there during World War II. We had many bases there during the Cold War to detect incoming Soviet ballistic missiles. There is a diplomatic way to handle this that I think we should use with NATO to increase security of the entire NATO alliance in the Arctic region. But obviously, South Korea, Japan, other Pacific powers have an interest in the Arctic too, and that to me gives a great opportunity for increased cooperation, particularly between South Korea and Japan on the one hand, and the NATO alliance on the other. You know, the growing axis between Beijing and Russia is a real problem worldwide. And so I think we've got to even begin cooperation beyond the regional level and thinking about this problem that we face together on a worldwide basis.
Right, definitely. We should be expanding our sites. Now, let's also turn to Europe. The Russia-Ukraine war is now in its fourth year with really no clear end in sight, it seems. Ambassador, what do you think is keeping this conflict from moving forward to a resolution? And do you see any realistic off-ramp?
Well, having just concluded the negotiations in Abu Dhabi, I'm very pessimistic that there's a diplomatic solution. I'm not sure that a ceasefire necessarily is in Ukraine's interest, because if the border is frozen now, Russia controls 20% of Ukraine's territory, and if they had 3, 4, 5 years to recover, to rebuild their military, to rebuild their economy, I think we would simply face Russia's third invasion of Ukraine in the near future after that. The Russians believe, incorrectly in my view, that they can break Ukraine's military. Their advisors to Vladimir Putin are telling them perhaps this spring or summer that could happen. So I don't think the Kremlin sees any upside in a diplomatic resolution or a ceasefire. And I think their demands on Ukraine of even more territorial concessions that the Russians have not been able to win on the battlefield is just totally unrealistic. And then, of course, the longer term concern, how do we guarantee Ukraine's security against future Russian aggression? Despite a lot of rhetoric out in public, I still think is fundamentally unresolved and for obvious reasons makes the Ukrainians quite nervous.
Right, definitely. The prolonging war is definitely of a lot of concern, and we'll really have to keep close tabs on the latest developments. But of course, that's just a part of the much broader picture. We're really living in a world of simultaneous, overlapping crisis. So before we conclude our discussion, Ambassador, if you had one strong message for today's foreign policy leaders, one principle to keep in mind, what would it be?
Well, you know, Winston Churchill once said, the only thing worse than fighting with allies is fighting without allies. And for the people in the United States who have taken an isolationist view of what U.S. policy should be, this is a very mistaken attitude. And to the extent it's present in the Trump administration, we need to persuade the administration to think again and to remember what the Ronald Reagan approach to international affairs was. I'm confident if we can do that and repair some of the damage that's been done, we can withstand the threats that we face. But nobody should minimize the threats. Nobody should believe that they're taking places in places far away from the United States that we can ignore. The threat to the allies that we see in various parts of the world does constitute a threat to the United States and vice versa.
Right, that's a powerful message and that one that resonates, especially right now when strategic clarity feels harder to hold on to. But I'm afraid we'll have to leave our discussion here for now. Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us tonight. It's been a real privilege, and I hope we'll have the chance to continue this conversation sometime down the road.
Well, thank you very much. I look forward to it.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.